Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us. Thank you, Commissioner Franz, Budget Director Rayton, State Economist Kalamakidis. We appreciate your insight and the work that your team put together. Given the revenue collections over the last 3 months and projections given earlier this week by Federal Reserve Chairman Powell, it's not surprising there was a change in the budget forecast from when we stood with you in November. This forecast validates the approach that we proposed in our budget last Tuesday. We must make investments that continue economic growth, and my investments in education, jobs, and transportation will do just that. Now, I know when I finish, whether it's here or somewhere else, our Republican friends will come and take this place, and I'll just save you all time and tell you what they're going to tell you. Cut taxes and cut spending on education and those things that actually grow the economy. This trickle-down economic theory that no matter what the budget forecast says is what we have to do is what gets us into these problems. Had we followed their advice and had we followed what they're proposing, we will blow billion-dollar holes in our budget. It will come from the general fund, and the very investments that will allow us to grow in an economic slowdown will be taken away. The ability to have the best qualified workforce, the ability to have the best transportation system, the ability to have prosperity in communities that attract people to come here. So leaving that in there, they will try and pay for those on the backs of our children, our elderly, and our most vulnerable. This budget looks to the future, which is exactly what you need to do when facing slower economic growth. We left room in our proposed budget to help provide a cushion, and we will work with our commissioners and stakeholders to provide a revised budget recommendation in the near future. Now's the time to continue to protect the budget reserve and the general fund and help grow our economy with strategic investments in healthcare, education, and community prosperity. This is a fiscally responsible budget and bonding bill that at exactly this time of slower economic growth will continue to position Minnesota as amongst the best states, not only in the upper Midwest, but in the country, to attract businesses, to grow economic prosperity for families, and have us continue on a path to greater prosperity. So with that, I'd be glad to answer any questions.
Governor, what about attracting more people? There seem to be real concerns about the demographic decline in the workforce and that we need more people to move to Minnesota. What can you do to get people, not just from around the country, but around the world, to come here?
That's exactly right. And the question is about how do we attract people? This happened in the campaign. I made it a very clear place about this. Minnesota needs a place that's welcoming to immigrants from other states and from other countries. Minnesota needs to be a state that when you come here, you're going to be respected, you're going to get the opportunity to prosper. We also need to make sure that the amenities of why people move. When they ask people why they move or relocate, the one thing that doesn't end up in the top 3 is taxes in many cases. It talk about the quality of their schools, about opportunities. So the one thing we can do is we can make sure that job growth opportunities through the best qualified workforce, the healthiest population by making sure that our healthcare system continues to grow out and provide that quality care they need, and then making sure when we talk about community prosperity, those amenities that make communities look attractive to folks thinking about moving here. And we should reach out. This last week at the National Governors Association, I spent a considerable amount of time sitting down with the ambassadors of Canada to the United States, the ambassador of Mexico to the United States, and the ambassador of Japan to the United States, and visited them both at their residence and in set-down one-on-one meetings about making sure we're bringing folks here and telling them why Minnesota is an attractive place with a well-qualified, well-educated workforce that has a work ethic that is world-renowned. And the response was positive from each of those. So as governor, my job is to go out, continue to make those cases, continue to show that the investments, and to make sure that we don't make that fatal mistake of the very thing that makes Minnesota so appealing to people is the things that we cut in a budget.
Level anymore. What can you do as a governor, as a state, on immigration?
Yeah, we can do what I said during the campaign. Putting up a sign outside of Minneapolis and telling people they're not welcome is certainly not the way to do that. I will stand with our immigrant communities, I always have, to make the case that this is a state of immigrants. This is a state that is open and welcoming to immigrants. We continue to ask the federal government to do comprehensive immigration reform, to get beyond this simplistic dead-end argument about a barrier when we need to be talking holistically about what it takes. And I think here in Minnesota, we know this, that immigration spans the spectrum of economic opportunities, whether it's agricultural production or whether it's researchers in neuroscience at the Mayo Clinic. That's what immigration brings to Minnesota, and as governor, we'll continue to push for it. But you're right, the federal government has to move. we can certainly send that message to folks that, that you will be welcome to Minnesota.
Economic growth is in fact slowing, which could lead to people possibly losing their jobs. Is now the time to increase things like the gas tax and things like driver fees?
Yeah, the question is the one that comes up. This is the conundrum about what people happen. The very things that grow our economy, and most would agree, at a national recession, and this is not a recession, it's a slowdown, but getting ahead of it in job creation, one of the best firewalls against a downturn is investments in infrastructure. It has played out time and time and time again. Now is exactly the time that we should invest. Those are jobs in our communities. Those are disposable incomes in our communities. Those are the things that increase growth. Because again, we need to have this honest conversation. To do nothing in this state about transportation costs over $1,000 a year to people. Now I heard somebody make the argument to me the other day. They figured up the gas mileage on their F-150, and they told me what it was going to cost extra. I said, in that logic, why wouldn't you argue to take the gas tax to zero then? And the person said, well, we need roads. And I said, that's our point. Our point is in the job creation and what we need to do. We make sure in this that the Working Families Tax Credit shields those folks that are making $45,000 or so less from the fullest impact of it. But those are job growth creators. Those are the things that move forward. And I think what it says here, this is not a downturn of people losing their jobs. There are not enough people to fill all the jobs that are available. And as the economist said, one of the things we're going to see is we hope to see it more than we have from the President Trump's tax cuts, is starting to see real wages start to rise, not just in that top 1 percentile that was seeing the vast benefits. So we think it makes sense to invest in what makes Minnesota competitive, to invest and provide that firewall against a downturn by creating a lot of local jobs and an economic boost, and making sure that Minnesotans have the capacity to drive on safe roads, get to places faster than they would have, and attract people to work here.
Governor, Republicans are going to come up here and say that's at odds with trying to attract people here if their tax burden keeps going up and Minnesota's in the top 10 or top 5 of all these categories. So how do you thread that needle between?
Well, they would be wrong. People are moving here. And again, it's not the project. They keep telling me this. I said, what is your goal of moving us out of the top 10? Because if you work at that hard enough, would you like to move us into the top 10 worst states in education, top 10 worst states in health outcomes, top 10 worst states in personal income? Because we rank in the top 5 of all those. We rank in the top 3 of personal happiness amongst Minnesotans. So the goal isn't at the end state of this. I'm very cognizant of working families, making sure that folks are able to keep as much of their income as they can. But for a working family, the ability to have a quality school, the ability to have amenities in our community, because again, I guess it doesn't make much difference if you can build a swimming pool in your backyard, but when I watch communities in greater Minnesota, one of the things they have to do is close their community pools in the summer because they don't have enough in that. We're going to continue to make the case. Again, this is no surprise. This is trickle-down economic theory. There is one tool in the Republican toolbox: cut taxes. Cut taxes, cut taxes. At this case in time, we are cutting taxes for working Americans, for the working Minnesotans that are in the middle, but we're making strategic investments that grow the economy. I am not going to turn away from this because I want to be clear. If they decide that they're going to allow the sunset of the provider tax, that is a $900+ billion hole in this. And their only place to go for that is our children, our elderly, our veterans, the things that come out of the general fund. If they are not willing to have what we've always done in this state, separate financing for transportation opposed to the general fund, we will eventually bleed that off. And if they are not willing to look at the next 20 to 30 years, Minnesota will go from 5.5 million people to 6.4 million people over the next 30 years. That's going to be more congestion. That's going to be more people in schools. It's going to give us more opportunities for job growth. But if we're not building the infrastructure necessary, we won't get there. So I don't believe they have any proof historically to show that that works. I don't believe that they have any indication that Minnesota has driven people away. And I don't think there's been any indication that Minnesotans' personal finances and personal happiness haven't continued to grow as we've made those investments.
You come in here with a budget that includes a big gas tax, some fee increases, and then a bonding bill that in an off year is the biggest we've
There is no
seen.
off year in bonding. There's only been 2 years we haven't bonded.
And well, in an odd numbered year. What does this say about given this is your first term, these are your first big proposals, what does this say about the way you're going to approach divided government and the way you want to see Minnesota go?
Yeah, well, the way I'm going to approach any government, whether it's divided or not, is based on the facts and changing as circumstances change. We propose a budget that makes sense, that grows Minnesota's economy, that keeps us in a balanced budget and a stable financial situation, keeps our AAA bond rating. Again, this is the one that always kind of, I have a hard time wrapping my mind around. At a time of the lowest interest rates and the need that is acknowledged by all, it makes sense to bond at a time when we can get the best rates to start relieving that. So we have a $600 million corrections backlog in physical plant. What do you expect to do with that? Are we going to leave bad sightlines and allow people to be killed? Or are we going to address them? Why would we not fix those things on the front end at a cheaper rate to pay them off sooner than to wait till the crisis gets worse? So I don't approach it necessarily as divided government, but I do remind people the Senate was not up for election in 2018. And the people spoke pretty strongly about the Minnesota House. They spoke pretty strongly about this governor's office. And I was very clear about what I believed would grow Minnesota's economy and what Minnesotans believed it would. And I promised to propose for them a fiscally sound budget that invested in a quality of life second to none that made sense for Minnesota's future. And that's what I think we've proposed.
Why can't I get raised? I mean, not me specifically, but with the labor shortage, I think economists have been expecting wage growth to be increasing, and we're still not seeing it in any levels.
Well, and 85% of the tax cuts went to stock buybacks, and the vast majority went to corporations. When Amazon pays 0%, now they want to come to Minnesota and find in my tax conformity bill that they should get another tax cut, I guess, so they can pay less than zero, and we'll pay them just to exist. That's what happened. This is trickle-down economic theory in its classic state. None of that, and a large proportion of it, did not raise wages. And it's going to become more difficult. It's why you start to see here in Minnesota, large employers embraced $15 minimum wage, large employers embraced paid family leave, because they know it's much cheaper in the long run to attract and retain a quality worker than it is to just churn through them. So I hope that question, Peter, gets asked when the Republicans take this spot. Why aren't Minnesotans getting a raise? And as the state economist said, we're going to have to count on those raises to come in because there's not enough people to fill the jobs. So there's not going to be a broadening of the tax base by more people getting hired. It's going to have to come from rising wages.
Do you plan to pull back any of your initiatives you laid out last week or trim them down to
No, my pledge is to go back through line by line with our commissioners and with our stakeholders. It would be irresponsible not to in light of the new forecast. I think my team right now, as I asked them as of this morning when we saw these numbers as you did, to go ahead and start looking where that needs to happen. And again, that's just responsible budgeting.
Are there any places where you know you'll go?
I can't say at this time. After the last 2 days, I feel like investing more in the cure for a common cold, but pardon me. No, we're still looking. I think it's pretty obvious for folks where you see where we spend money on healthcare and education and things. We're going to have to look and make hard choices. I'm willing to make those hard choices. What I'm not willing to do is take an ideological approach to every single economic situation and say tax cuts for the wealthiest in corporations will grow Minnesota. We simply aren't going to do that.
Will you mostly stay the course with your budget and bonding, maybe just with some tweaks? Is this not having a major impact on either of those proposals?
Yeah, because, well, the one thing is, and again, I'll get into more details, Tom, when we get into it, we purposely left a lot on the bottom line in anticipation of where this would go. Part of that was knowing that it's hard when you have to revise. We've got a lot of stakeholders, whether they be elderly Minnesotans, whether they be our littlest Minnesotans looking for childcare, those types of things. Once you put those proposals out there and then you have to start coming back, I'm certainly understand that that's what we're going to have to go look at. We'll look through line by line, just like we did when we wrote this budget.
Folks, we have time for one more question for the DFL House. The revenue growth, it's slowing to about 2.3%. If you've read your Thomas Piketty, that's about what the norm is over the centuries. This post-war economy's been 3 to 4%. Are you worried that this reflects the stabilization of that norm?
Yeah, thank you for doing that. I spent about a month reading that and going through, and this idea of the wealth disparities is starting to happen. Yes, and again, I think something needs to be called out. when we did these tax cuts, we were going to get 5 to 6% GDP growth. And when many of us said, we don't think we're going to get that, they said, yes, we would. If the chart that was up here shows you that sugar high that we got in growth that came out of the 2017 tax bill is starting to come down. Yes, I think there is the potential that there may be a little more of the norm over long-term growth. Our economy is a mature economy. I think it bodes more now than ever before. Investing in those fundamentals that we know are at the heart of the economy, the best qualified workforce, the healthiest workforce, and those infrastructure pieces, whether it's broadband, highways, or transit, that allow people to grow is going to put us in a better position. But I think, yes, I think that is probably more of the historical trend. It's been down a little bit, but you know, we saw this, and it's nothing surprising to anyone. We exploded the deficits, and many of you followed my time in Congress. I am a deficit hawk. I do think they matter. I think the good thing about state government is that need to have a balanced budget, but we don't also have all the tools in our toolbox that at times when you have some of that spending that stimulates growth, we saw that worked and pulled us out of the recession, but there's a whole nother school of thought that says austerity is the way to do that. Now that's never worked, but it won't stop people from trying it. All right, thank you all for that.